Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. I know it's been a hot minute since I haven't recorded and posted a video here on YouTube, but today is the day, and today I'm going to share with you my process on how I write, upload, and share a recipe on my blog. So if you're a food blogger or interested in getting into food blogging, this video could be super interesting to you, so make sure to watch this video from beginning to the end. The very first step of bringing a recipe to life onto my blog is actually brainstorming. So the way I brainstorm is at the beginning of every single month, I will plan out the 4 recipes that I want to have on my blog. My personal goal is to have a recipe on my blog every week. So at the beginning of every month, if I kind of plan what is going to go on my blog, I don't have to think every single week, okay, what should I be making this week? What recipe should be interesting and stuff like that. I do all that work at the beginning of the month. So second step, after I've kind of figured out what I'm going to be making every week, it's actually testing the recipe. For me personally, I tend to test a recipe between 1 and 3 times depending on the recipe and depending on kind of the first, second, or third outcome. I've personally noticed that a savory recipe for me, I generally have to test it maybe once or twice, but for more complex, big goods and things like that, I probably test 2 to 3 times, depending again on the recipe and the complexity of it. Once a recipe has been tested once or twice or 3 times, depending on the recipe, the third step is then to actually prepare the food and shoot it. Generally speaking, I will be able to shoot between 2 to 3 recipes a day, again, depending on the type of recipe and how complex it is. And also the times where, let's say I create a recipe and I shoot it the same day, because the creation of the recipe might take a little bit longer, I'll just be able to create and shoot one recipe in that day. But for the times that I've tested the recipe more than once, I'll generally be able to shoot 2 to 3 recipes in one day. Then, once all my shooting is done, at the end of my shoot day, that is very important, I transfer all of my images onto an external drive. The reason why I'm saying I do it at the end of my shooting day is because it has happened in the past. Well guys, something unfortunate happened. I deleted all the photos I just shot this afternoon. Then once the images are transferred, I can relax and pick a time when I want to edit them. Sometimes it will be the day I shoot, but sometimes it'll be a couple of days later. And then when I edit my pictures, before I actually jump to the specific like color corrections and all these things, I actually import all of my images into Adobe Bridge. Adobe Bridge is actually a program that I just recently started using, and it's basically a program that allows me to filter through all my images and to select the ones that are the best to edit. And so I'll go through every single image and give a rating to the image, and the images with the highest rating are going to be the ones that I actually import into Lightroom. What this allows me to do is that it allows my Lightroom catalog to not be as heavy, and whenever I open it, instead of having, let's say, 150 images that I shot that day, I'll have just the 25 that are actually the very best images. So once I've transferred my images onto Lightroom, then what I do is I start editing my pictures. And basically what is important in this step for me personally is to have a good variety of images. So I'll try to have images of the dish overhead, a 3/4 angle, a straight on angle, something maybe with a hand in the shot, things like that. Of course, these are things that I try to think of before I shoot, but when I do edit, I make sure that in my final edits, I have at least 5 to 7 or 5 to 10 different images that I can keep, because I like to have a few different images in my blog posts, and also because I like to have a variety of things that I can post on Instagram later on. Another little note in my editing process is that I personally like to stick to one editing style for the set of images. So let's say in the example of the pasta dish, I'm not going to edit one image in a very bright and airy editing style, and then the other one in a moody and dark style. I'm just gonna try to keep everything consistent, again, because most of those images will end up in my blog post, and I want the blog post to kind of flow and look beautiful all together, rather than having a bunch of different styles all together. Once all my editing is done and is ready to go, the next step is actually exporting those images into different formats. I personally like to export my images in 300 dpi, 72 dpi, optimized for my blog, and optimized for Instagram. The reason why I have 4 different formats is because those different formats can come in handy for different occasions. Let's say for the 300 dpi, it's if ever one of my recipes needs to be published in a magazine that is printed, it's really good to have a high quality image on hand. If the 72 dpi is if, let's say, I would want my recipe to be featured on a brand's website and they'll want to resize the image based on their needs to post on their website, then in that case, I don't have to go back into Lightroom and then export in the specific format. I could just send them the 72 dpi and then they can resize it the way they want to. The optimized for my blog is basically self-explanatory. My blog's width is 1,500 pixels, so I really make sure that I have a set of images that are exactly 1,500 pixels of width. What that does is that it makes sure that all of my images are very high quality and that they will appear really, really good on my blog. So my last exporting format for my images is optimized for Instagram. These images will be in a format that would look the best for Instagram, and what I personally do is that I make sure that my shortest edge of my image is 1080p. That way, that will ensure that when I post my pictures on my feed or in my stories, they will always look super crisp and really, really beautiful. Once all my images are all exported and ready to go, it's time to write my blog post. Writing a blog post for me takes between half an hour to 45 minutes or an hour, depending on if it's hard for me to write that blog post, if I have inspiration, or if, let's say, the writing of the recipe itself is more tricky. But yeah, I try to include in my blog post a little introduction of what the recipe is going to be about. If you've noticed on my blog, it's usually the part that is in italic at the very beginning of my post. Then I will kind of give a backstory of where I got the inspiration for that recipe, or I'll tell like a personal anecdote linked to the recipe. And once that is done, I have a section in every single one of my blog posts, which is a few notes about this recipe. This section is a section that specifically answers questions that people might have regarding the recipe. Being a person who loves to try new recipes online and also very much loves to modify recipes, usually when I find a recipe online that I'm interested in trying, I might not necessarily have every single one of the ingredients, or I'd like to modify certain things. And I really found that it's super helpful when food bloggers have a section in their blog post or even at the bottom of their recipe where they detail some of the potential modifications that you can do to their original recipe. And so in my website, that's what I'm trying to do as well. This section is definitely not mandatory, but it's personally something that I always look for in other bloggers' blog posts. And that's why I decided to add that section on my website. Then as you move down in my blog post, after the section of a few notes regarding this recipe, I have the recipe itself. So with the time it takes to create the recipe, the yield, the ingredients, the steps, and a few extra notes at the bottom. Once I'm done writing all my recipe, I copy it and I bring it into Squarespace. Into Squarespace, I'll paste the recipe and then basically format it so that all the fonts kind of look good, the spaces look good, everything works well. Once all that's all beautiful and formatted, I'll add in all of the pictures that I want to include in my blog post, the pictures that I've exported previously in the format that is optimized for my blog. Once I've added all of the images that I wanted to add onto my blog post, I will create a pin. The tool that I personally like to use is a website called Canva. Canva is a really, really good resource for creating pins, flyers, Instagram posts, Instagram stories. So I use that tool a lot. And that's where I actually create all of my food blogs and my templates for my MailChimp campaigns. So once the pin is all formatted and beautiful, I'll just add it onto my blog post at the very end of it, and then I'll publish my blog posts. Usually I tend to publish my blog post 1 or 2 days before I actually launch it and share about it on Instagram or with my MailChimp subscribers. The reason for that is because the day that I publish my blog post is also the day that I tend to work on my MailChimp campaign, and I also submit my recipe to websites. What I mean by that is that if you're not aware, there are some websites out there that basically categorize a bunch of recipes. And so if you're a food blogger and would like people to see your recipe, one of the good ways to do that is to go on websites like foodgawker.com, and you basically submit your recipe, you add an image, a little description, and a couple of tags associated with it, and then you submit it to that site. They'll review it, make sure all the links are functioning, everything's good, and then if they approve it, your recipe will be in their directory in the directory. And then so when people look up, for example, vegan pasta, they will find your recipe in that whole directory. So I basically do that with every single one of the recipes that I personally publish on my blog. And then once I've submitted my photos onto Food Gawker, I'll then pin all of my pins. I'll pin the pin that I created in Canva, as well as a couple of other images in my blog, because I've personally noticed that if I just pin the pin might not perform as well as other images without text, which is something that's kind of interesting. So I personally pin the pin, as well as two images that are in my blog post. Usually I tend to go for one image that's kind of a closer up, more like inviting picture, and one that's a little bit further out. Once Food Gawker and Pinterest are done, the before last step, I know there's a lot to this, is actually for me to go onto MailChimp and to create a new campaign. So I will create a campaign, give a name to it, select the people that I'm going to be sending it to. I will upload a template that I created again on Canva onto my MailChimp campaign and make sure all the information is correct. I add a little bit of description, a quick link for people to follow, as well as a couple of other links at the bottom that I would be interested in people discovering. For example, the food photography training that I offer, as well as my presets that I sell. And then once that's all done and I've tested the campaign, I've sent it to myself, it works, all the links are okay, nothing is broken, all the images look good, I send the campaign to all of the people that are in my MailChimp contacts. So once that's all done, my campaign has been sent. The very last step for me personally is to share the recipe on my social media. So I'll take one of the pictures that I exported that is optimized for Instagram. I'll crop it the way that I want to. I'll share it to my followers. I'll also do a little story about it so that people know that this recipe is live, and that's it. I know there's a lot to this. It's quite a big process. I've been working with this process for a couple of months now, integrating a few new things here and there, but now I kind of feel like I have a good grip on it. So this whole process, generally speaking, takes between 1 day and 1.5 days to do. Yeah, because I have like specific steps that I follow one after the other, it's really not too bad. It's not that complicated. It might feel like a lot at the beginning, but once you find a little rhythm and a process that works for you, you'll be all good to go. So that's it, you guys. I hope this video was interesting and that you learned something new, and that if you're interested in doing food blogging or any kind of blogging, really, this has kind of helped you understand a little bit of the process that goes into each blog post that is uploaded on the site. If it is something that's been helpful to you, make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment. That's it. I will see you hopefully not in that long. I feel like I should be doing more videos, so I really hope to do a video again very soon. Bye.